She was nothing but a silhouette when the stagecoach driver first spotted her, curled up in the red dust like a discarded coat, hair tangled, dress torn from the hem to the knees. At first, he thought she was dead, but then her fingers twitched. He didn't ask questions. Folks around these parts had learned not to. By noon, the coach rolled into the town of Bitter Creek, and she was left on the wooden porch outside the sheriff's office, blinking against the hard sun. Her lips were cracked, her eyes were empty, and when Sheriff McClary asked for her name, she didn't say a word. "She can't stay here," Miss Landis hissed, the preacher's wife, eyeing the woman like a snake on her doorstep. "No name, no papers, no one to claim her. She's not a stray dog," the sheriff replied, though even he kept his distance. Word spread fast, like rot in a barrel. The newcomer had no husband, no children, no story, just bruises under the dirt and a silence that made folks uneasy. The sheriff, tired and unconvinced, finally gave her an old wool blanket and pointed to the empty stall behind the livery stable. "You can sleep there tonight," he muttered. "Tomorrow we'll see." That night, she huddled in the straw like an unwanted ghost, listening to the distant sounds of laughter and fiddles from the saloon. Her stomach growled, but she didn't cry. She hadn't cried in days, maybe weeks. When dawn crept in, she walked barefoot to the well and washed her face with trembling hands. She didn't expect kindness, and none came. At the general store, Mrs. Pennington handed her a broom without a word. She swept the floor until her fingers blistered, and in return was given a slice of cornbread too stale to chew. By evening, she found shelter behind the saloon, near the barrels where broken chairs and empty bottles went to die. She laid down beside them, blending into the wreckage. That's when she heard footsteps, boots, heavy ones, coming closer. She looked up, heart tight in her throat. A man stood in the shadows, tall, still, and silent. He didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at her like she wasn't wreckage at all. She didn't know his name, but by morning, the whole town would remember hers. By sunrise, Bitter Creek had already made up its mind. "She doesn't speak. That means she's hiding something," murmured one of the churchwomen outside the bakery. "No ring, no shoes, no escort. Must be a whore or worse," spat her farmer's wife, who had never missed a Sunday service, but missed no chance to condemn. The woman in question, still nameless, swept the wooden planks outside the saloon with a bent back and blistered palms. Her dress, once peach-colored, now hung like a rag, soaked in dust and shame. She didn't lift her head when people passed, not after a child threw a pebble at her and shouted, "Ghost lady!" Inside the saloon, the owner, Mr. Calloway, leaned over the counter. "You work quiet, I'll let you stay back there at night. No trouble, you hear?" She nodded once. It was more kindness than she expected. He didn't smile, but he didn't leer either. That night, she sat behind the saloon's kitchen wall, knees tucked beneath her. A single candle flickered beside a cracked plate of beans she hadn't dared eat yet. Hunger fought with fear. Then the door creaked. She froze. Boots again. The same slow, deliberate steps. Not heavy like the sheriff, not hurried like the drunkards. These were controlled, cold. The man stepped into the back room without knocking. He didn't reach for her. Didn't say her name. How could he? No one knew it. But he looked at her, and this time, he didn't look away. Tall, dressed in a dust-black duster with streaks of silver in the stubble lining his jaw, he stood like a storm deciding where to strike. She recognized him now. Every soul in Bitter Creek did. Elijah Creed. They said he once shot a man through both hands before asking why he'd drawn his gun in the first place. Said he'd taken bounty jobs no one else dared accept. That he rode, alone, because the dead followed too closely. He looked at her the way a man looks at a map before a long journey. Not like property, not like prey. Like a puzzle he didn't need to solve but couldn't leave alone. She stared back. He didn't speak, just nodded once and turned away. The door closed behind him like a question unanswered. The next day, everything changed. Word spread that 3 boys, sons of landowners, had tried to break into the back of the saloon that night. Said they were laughing, drunk, whispering about free company. Said they stopped laughing when a shadow stepped from the alley and said, "Go home." No gun, no threats, just those 2 words. They went home, all right. One limped, one wet. Himself, and none would say who had stopped them. But the townsfolk knew, everyone knew. That afternoon, Elijah Creed walked into the saloon. The place went still. He didn't sit, didn't drink, just looked at her sweeping. "Got a name?" he asked, voice dry as bone. She hesitated. He glanced at the barkeep. "She works here?" Calloway nodded. "Sweeps clean, doesn't beg, doesn't talk." Creed turned back to her. "She's under my protection now." A murmur. Then a man at the table laughed nervously. "Your woman." Creed's eyes moved like thunderclouds. "My wife," he said. And just like that, the room collapsed into silence. She didn't speak, didn't blink. He turned and walked out. And from that moment forward, the nameless woman became his woman, in the eyes of a town that feared only 2 things, judgment from above, and Elijah Creed. After that day, everything shifted, subtly, but undeniably. She still swept the saloon's floor, still washed the dishes no one dared to touch, still walked the long, quiet road to the well with the sunrise. But now, when she passed, the murmurs stopped mid-syllable. Men touched their hats, women pulled their children a step closer. No one called her a ghost anymore. Now they called her his. "Elijah Creed's wife," they whispered. "Though I never saw a wedding." "She wears no ring," some said. "She wears his protection," others replied, and that was ring enough. He didn't come every day, but when he did, the silence around him was louder than thunder. He'd enter the saloon, look at her for a moment, sometimes a nod, sometimes nothing, and leave again. Never a touch, never a smile, never a word, spoken more than needed. She didn't understand it, not fully, but in his presence she stood straighter, worked steadier, felt seen. One morning, as she gathered kindling behind the stable, a group of townswomen passed nearby. Their chatter paused. One of them stepped forward, Mrs. Greaves, whose husband ran the bank and whose heart was made of vinegar. "You must be proud," the woman said, lips tight, "to have caught the eye of a killer." The others giggled, but it was nervous, not kind. She didn't respond. Another woman leaned in. "Don't think it makes you one of us. You can't hide behind that man forever." Still no response. "Are you deaf?" Mrs. Greaves snapped. "Or just dumb?" Then a sound, bootsteps, heavy, slow. The women froze. Elijah Creed rounded the corner, shadow cutting across the dust. He didn't look at them, didn't say a thing. But he walked straight toward the girl, placed a small bundle at her feet, wrapped in burlap and tied with coarse twine, and nodded once before walking away. The women scattered like hens from a hawk. She waited until they were gone, then opened the bundle. Inside, a new pair of shoes, plain, sturdy, her size, and beneath them, folded carefully, a hand-stitched apron with tiny blue flowers along the hem. She hadn't owned anything that soft in years, maybe ever. That night, she slept, curled around the bundle like a child with a secret. The following days blurred together like dust in wind. She cleaned, she ate, she wore the apron with care, and sometimes, only sometimes, she let herself watch the road, wondering if he would come again. Then came the night of the fire. Someone tossed a bottle of lamp oil through the saloon's back door. A flame bloomed in the hallway, wild and hungry. She had been asleep in the corner with an empty plate when the smoke choked her awake. She stumbled toward the door, but it was jammed. The smoke was thick. Heat roared against her face. She thought, "This is how I end, not even a name to burn with." But then crack! The back door split with a single blow. Elijah stood in the frame, hatless, smoke curling around him like judgment. He stepped through, lifted her like a sack of grain, and carried her out without a word. He didn't ask if she was all right. He just placed her gently on the ground outside, knelt beside her, and held a canteen to her lips. Only after she drank did he speak. "You'll come with me now." And she nodded, not because she owed him, but because for the first time in her life she trusted someone not to leave. The cabin stood 3 miles out, past the old dry creek bed, and beyond where Bitter Creek's gossip dared to ride. Hidden by cottonwoods and scrub pine, it sat atop a small ridge, sturdy, square, and silent, much like the man who built it. She hadn't asked where he was taking her. She just rode behind him on the horse, clutching the saddle horn with white knuckles. Her legs trembled from the fire, her lungs still burned, and her mind swam between fear and something far more dangerous, hope. He didn't speak on the ride, didn't look back, but he rode steady, slow, as if not to shake her. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down, not by lifting, but by offering a hand. She took it. Inside it was simple. 1 room, 1 bed, 1 stove, 1 table. But it was clean, lived in, real. He pointed to the bed. "It's yours." She shook her head, hesitant. "I sleep outside," he added, grabbing a blanket and walking to the porch. Before she could stop him, he was gone. She stood there, alone again, in a place too quiet to feel real. On the table sat a chipped mug, half a loaf of bread, and something she hadn't seen in years, a bar of soap wrapped in cloth. She didn't cry. She scrubbed. That night, wrapped in a wool blanket softer than anything she remembered, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind move through the trees. She expected to feel fear, but it never came, only silence. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt safe. The next morning, she stepped out onto the porch and saw him sitting on a stump, sharpening a blade. He looked up, said nothing. She nodded. He nodded back. That became their rhythm. He rode into town every other day, came back with sacks of flour, beans, salt. Once, a tin of coffee. He never asked what she wanted, but she always found small things among the supplies that made her feel seen. A comb, a spool of thread, a clean towel folded with care. She began sweeping the porch, airing the blankets, tending the small garden of weeds until it became something useful. She boiled water for his coffee before he woke, left it on the table without a word. They lived like ghosts, separate, silent, but never alone. One afternoon, as she hung linens, a rider approached. She tensed. Elijah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. The rider, a young man with 2 slick boots and a mouth too fast, smirked. "Didn't know Creed kept a woman now," he said. "How much for a turn?" Elijah didn't move. The man spat. "Ain't no paper says she's yours." That's when Elijah stepped off the porch, fast, silent, a blur. He struck the man once, just once, but the rider fell like a felled tree, blood pouring from a split lip and nose. Elijah leaned down, said something no one else could hear, and the man scrambled onto his horse and fled without looking back. Elijah turned to her then, still calm, still silent. "You're not property," he said, "but no man touches you while I draw breath." She stared at him, and for the first time, her voice didn't fail. "My name," she began, then stopped, because she didn't know it, didn't have one. His expression softened, barely. He pulled a scrap of paper from his coat and placed it on the table. Inside, 1 word written there. Choose. The paper sat on the table for days. At first, she didn't touch it, just stared at it like it might catch fire on its own. 1 word, scratched in careful ink with a hand that had known violence. Choose. What did that mean for someone like her? Someone who had been left, taken, silenced, and shoved from place to place like cargo without a label. A name was a thing given, not claimed, wasn't it? Still, every night after Elijah had gone to sleep on the porch and the fire inside had turned to coals, she would sit beside the paper and whisper sounds into the silence. Anna, she tried once, but it felt too soft. Clara, another time, too sweet. Martha, that name tasted like stone in her mouth. Then one morning, as she fed the hens with the last handful of cornmeal, a word rose up from inside her like a buried ember stirred by wind. She whispered it aloud. It didn't sound false, it sounded earned. That same day, Elijah returned from town with new cloth and nails. He placed them on the table and nodded toward the cabin's side wall. "Need a place for shelves," he said. "You keep making more use of this house than I ever did." She blinked, not just at the words, but at the way he said you. Not my woman, not the girl, not her, just you. Later, as she helped him hold the plank steady, her hand brushed his by accident. He didn't flinch, but he didn't linger either. That night, she carved something into the wood above the bed, letters awkward and uneven, but hers all the same. She didn't show him. But when he saw it the next morning, he paused, said nothing. Then, as he passed her on the porch, he placed a simple silver ring beside her plate. Not on her finger, beside her plate. She didn't ask what it meant. She knew. News traveled, as it always did. In town, a few folks started calling her Mrs. Creed, though never to her face, but not everyone approved. The women who had once sneered now watched from church steps with narrowed eyes. Mrs. Greaves, in particular, couldn't let it go. "She's playing house with a killer," she muttered one Sunday. "She used her body to snare him," another said. One whispered what others dared not say aloud. "She's a witch. How else would a man like him take in her?" Their husbands didn't argue, not because they agreed, but because Elijah Creed's name had more weight than any scripture. One evening, Mercy entered town to trade eggs and honey at the store. She wore a clean dress now, brown cotton, mended by her own hands, hair pulled back, chin slightly lifted. She felt their eyes, all of them, but she kept walking. Inside, the room went still. Mr. Pennington took the eggs without a word, gave her matches, sugar, and a cloth bag of salt. As she turned to leave, a young boy, maybe 10, stepped into her path. He looked up unafraid. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused, then answered clearly, "Mercy." The boy smiled. "That's a good name," and walked away. She stepped outside just as Elijah arrived on horseback, leading a mule packed with flour. He looked at her. She nodded once. "Mercy," she said again. He gave the faintest of smiles, more in the eyes than on the mouth, and just before turning toward home he muttered, "It fits." Mercy thought names would be enough, that once she had one, spoken aloud, etched in wood, carried like a quiet torch. People would let her be. But in Bitter Creek, a woman didn't earn her place by surviving. She earned it by being useful, quiet, or invisible, and Mercy now was neither. She walked upright through the dusty streets. She spoke when spoken to. She returned the stares with stillness, not shame. The preacher took notice. He began mentioning Jezebel in his sermons again, always vague, always directed toward those who tempt men to stray from the path. Mrs. Greaves sat in the front pew, nodding, clutching her prayer book like a weapon. She whispered to the other women about strange spirits in the hills, and how a woman without a past might have made a deal to gain a man like that. The lies bloomed like wild thorns. One morning, Mercy found a dead sparrow nailed to the cabin door. No note, just blood on the wood and silence in the trees. She didn't cry. She burned the bird and scrubbed the porch clean before Elijah returned. But he knew. He always knew. That night, as they sat in the orange hush of firelight, he pulled something from his coat. A thin silver chain with a medallion, plain, worn, carved with a cross so faint it looked like a scar. He placed it in her hand. "My mother's," he said. "She believed in protection." Mercy looked at him, unsure. "She died praying," he added. "Didn't stop the pain, but it gave her peace." She closed her fingers around the chain. "I don't know if I believe in protection," she whispered, "but I know I believe in you." He didn't answer. But he didn't look away. Days passed. The rumors festered. Then came the town gathering, an autumn evening where barrels were tapped, pies judged, and music played under lanterns. Mercy hadn't planned to go, but Elijah asked. He simply said, "It's time." They arrived together. Every step she took beside him felt like walking through fire. Eyes burned across her skin. Mothers pulled daughters closer. A few men tipped their hats, slowly, respectfully, but said nothing more. The preacher stood at the center of it all, speaking to the mayor, holding his Bible like a badge. When Elijah approached, the man smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Good of you to come, Mr. Creed," he said. "And Mrs. Mercy," she replied before Elijah could speak. The preacher's smile thinned. "Ah, a name reborn." He turned to the crowd. "Let us all remember, names are sacred things given by God, not taken by men or women." A hush fell. The mayor cleared his throat, trying to change the subject, but the damage had been planted, seeds of doubt watered by fear. Mercy and Elijah stayed only 10 more minutes. On the ride back, she stared ahead. "They'll never stop," she said, "no matter what I do." Elijah said nothing for a long time. Then, "I can leave, put you somewhere safe, far." She looked at him. "Do you want me gone?" His jaw flexed. "No." She reached for his hand on the reins. "Then I stay." That night, as wind howled against the cabin and the fire snapped low, Elijah did something he hadn't done before. He took the silver ring he had left beside her plate weeks ago and slid it onto her finger himself. Not a ceremony, not a promise, just a truth, silent, steady, unshakable. And Mercy, for the first time, slept through the night without dreaming of fire. Winter came early that year. Frost crept across the windows like ghost fingers. The ground cracked beneath hooves. Trees groaned in the wind, and the mountains wore snow like a crown of silence. Inside the cabin, however, warmth lived. The fire never died. Mercy made sure of that. She rose before the first light, stoked the embers, boiled water for coffee, and folded the blankets, while Elijah sat on the porch, sharpening tools or mending a bridle with quiet hands. They never spoke much, but they didn't need to. Their silence had become something sacred, like a shared language with no wasted words. A glance could say what others needed whole sermons to explain. Elijah started carving a second chair, then a third. "Visitors?" she asked once. "Maybe someday," he said. She smiled, not at the idea of visitors, but at the fact he saw. A future now, one with chairs, one with her in it. One morning, she found him outside marking a patch of ground near the fence line. "What are you doing?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He nodded toward the slope. "Soil's soft there, good light." "For what?" "A garden," he said. "Thought you might want something that stays." Mercy blinked. "I do." And they began, together. She planted onions and potatoes. He built a frame for beans. She laid lavender and thyme near the porch. He drove a post into the ground and hung a weathered horseshoe on it. "For luck," he said, though his voice made it sound like a joke he barely believed in. At night, they sat by the fire. Sometimes she read from an old psalm, book someone had traded in town. Sometimes he whittled in silence. Once she dozed off in the second chair, and when she woke, he'd laid his coat over her shoulders. He didn't say a word, but neither did she. She only wore that coat from then on. Then one dusk, while hanging laundry, she heard hoofbeats, fast and wrong. Not Elijah, not a neighbor, a rider. She turned and froze. A man she didn't recognize dismounted with a sneer. Dust clung to his coat like sin. "You, Creed's little—" "A wife?" he asked, looking her over. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Didn't think he was the marrying type. Guess even monsters get lonely." She backed toward the door. "He's not here." "Oh, I know." The man smiled wide, showing gold teeth. "That's why I came." But before he could take another step, there was a sound behind him. A gunhammer cocked. Elijah. He stood in the barn's shadow, rifle raised. "You move," he said flatly. and you don't breathe again." The man raised both hands, mock surprise. "Easy now. Just came to say hello." Elijah said nothing more, but his silence screamed. The man backed away, mounted, and rode off, dust trailing like smoke behind him. That night, Mercy sat across from Elijah, hands shaking slightly. "Do you know him?" she asked. "I used to," he replied. "Will he come back?" Elijah didn't answer, but his jaw tightened, and his eyes didn't leave the window for a long time. Then he said, "You need to pack what matters." She nodded, not because she wanted to leave, but because she knew he'd never ask unless it was time. Before dawn, she took down the dried herbs, folded her apron, and kissed the wood above. The bed where her name still rested carved deep. She pressed her palm to it, not as a goodbye, but as a promise. Because some houses weren't just made of walls. They were built in silence, grown with kindness, and sealed with trust. And no man, no matter how cruel, could burn that down. They rode at dawn. Elijah didn't say where they were going. Mercy didn't ask. She trusted the silence between them more than she'd ever trusted spoken promises. But she saw the signs, extra bullets checked and rechecked in his coat. Eyes that didn't rest. The way he glanced back every few minutes, as if expecting the horizon to catch fire. They didn't take the road. He led them through scrubland and dried-out ravines, past gullies carved by spring floods and trees twisted by wind. Wherever they were headed, it wasn't a town. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small hunter's shack, half-rotted but dry. Elijah tied the horses in the trees and set traps around the perimeter. Then he handed her a loaded pistol. Mercy stared at it. "I've never fired one." He nodded. "Don't need to hit. Just make them pause." Her hands trembled as she took it. Inside, the air was heavy with pine and dust. Elijah moved like a man who'd done this before. Mercy sat on the cot, gun in her lap, trying to remember how to breathe. "Who is he?" she asked finally. Elijah didn't look up. "Name's Mace Boyd. Rode with me once. We hunted men for money, but Mace started hunting ones who hadn't done anything." Mercy felt the weight in his voice. "I walked away. He didn't." She nodded slowly. "And now he's back." Elijah's jaw worked. "Not for me, for you." They waited. 3 days, each one longer than the last. Elijah barely slept. Mercy didn't leave the cabin. She watched the tree line, her name a whisper in her own mind, like armor. Then on the 4th day, she saw it. A glint of metal on the ridge, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. "Elijah," she breathed. He was already moving, rifle in hand, out the back door without sound. The shot came just after sunset. Sharp, clean, too far to tell who it hit. Mercy's heart hammered. She gripped the pistol with both hands, knuckles white. Outside, the forest held its breath. Then came the footsteps. Not fast, not loud, measured. She pointed the gun at the door, finger trembling on the trigger. But it wasn't Mace Boyd who stepped through. It was a younger man, barely more than a boy, dust-covered, eyes wide with panic. A wound at his shoulder bled through his shirt. He looked at her, confused. You're the reason he's doing this." She blinked. "What?" He laughed, coughing blood. "He doesn't care about money. He wants to hurt Creed. Says, 'You're his soul. Take the soul, you kill the man.'" Mercy stood slowly. "And what are you?" He leaned against the wall, sliding down. "Just bait." His eyes rolled back. He passed out. A moment later, Elijah returned. "Mace?" she asked. "Gone, for now." He looked at the boy. "Alive?" she said. "For now," Elijah replied. That night, Elijah sat by the door, rifle across his lap, watching shadows. Mercy sat across from him, hands still shaking. She spoke without looking at him. "You should have left me. You had a life. Peace." Elijah's voice was low. "Peace is just silence when you don't care about anyone." She looked at him then. "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I hear every sound." She didn't smile, not fully. But she crossed the room, sat beside him, and rested her head on his shoulder. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. because the war had started, and love had already chosen its side. The boy was gone by morning. Elijah found his tracks leading west, toward Bitter Creek. Not hurried, not panicked, just steady, like someone following a plan laid out in blood. "He was never meant to kill me," Elijah muttered. "Only meant to bring Mace close enough to see what I'd protect." Mercy didn't argue. She simply began packing, not to run, but to move. Her gut told her this wouldn't end in a cabin or a court. It would end in a place no lawman would ever ride to. Elijah didn't stop her. By dusk, they were riding again, no words, no map, only instinct and the pull of unfinished war. They found the trap waiting 2 valleys over, an old abandoned silver mine surrounded by hills that swallowed sound. The boy's horse was tied nearby, empty saddle swinging. Mercy's breath caught. Elijah dismounted without a word, rifle slung over his shoulder, revolver at his hip. He turned to her. "You don't go in." She met his gaze. "If I don't, you might not come out." A pause. Then he handed her his spare pistol. "2 shots, then run." She nodded. They entered together. Inside, the mine was cold and slick. Timber beams groaned like dying trees. Mercy's footsteps echoed behind Elijah's silent stride. Then a voice came from the dark. "Well, I'll be—" The ghost finally brought her to me. Mace Boyd stepped into the glow of their lantern. A man shaped by violence, grin as sharp as broken glass, one eye clouded, one hand twitching near his holster. "Look at you," he sneered at Mercy. "No name, no bloodline, no worth. Yet he's bleeding the world to keep you alive." Mercy stepped forward. "I have a name now," she said, "and if you touch him, I'll put a hole in you big enough to pray through." Mace laughed. "Feisty." Then he drew, fast. But Elijah was faster. 1 shot. Mace staggered back, clutching his side, wheezing. "You still draw like the devil." Elijah walked forward slowly, revolver lowered. "I stopped being the devil when I met her." Mace raised his gun again. Desperate, shaking. Mercy didn't think. She fired. The shot cracked through the mine. Mace dropped, not dead, but finished. Elijah turned to her. "First shot." She nodded, shaking. "You sure it wasn't a warning?" She looked at him. No, that was Mercy. They left him there, alive. Broken, alone in the darkness he'd tried to drag them into. Outside, the wind had changed. Softer, warmer. The sky above them stretched wide and golden as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Elijah turned to Mercy and did something he had never done before. He reached for her hand, not to pull her, not to lead her, but just to hold it. "You saved me," he said. She shook her head. "No, I only gave you a reason to stay saved." They didn't ride back to the cabin. Not yet. They camped beneath the stars, fire crackling between them, and for the first time since their lives had collided, Elijah began to speak. Not of pain, not of blood, but of dreams. Of a porch with 3 chairs, of a child's name he had once imagined, of a dog, maybe, if the land allowed it. Mercy listened. Then she whispered, "We'll need a bigger table." And Elijah smiled. They returned to Bitter Creek at the end of the week, not because they had to, but because Elijah Creed did not run, and Mercy had nothing left to hide. Word spread fast, as it always did, that Mace Boyd had been found half dead near the ridge mines, gun hand shattered, muttering about a woman who shot like the end of days. He never came back. No one else tried. The town watched them ride in together, Elijah with his coat dusted in trail mud, and Mercy in her simple brown dress, eyes forward, steps firm. She carried herself like someone who had been tested by fire and chose not to burn. At the general store, Mr. Pennington greeted her with a nod and said nothing about payment. At the well, no one tried to cut the line. And at the church steps, the preacher watched in silence as Mercy passed him without a word, Elijah a step behind her. Mrs. Greaves turned her back, but her husband tipped his hat. Progress came slow. Bitter Creek wasn't a place that changed. Easy. But Mercy didn't need the whole town. She just needed her name. The cabin, once a shelter, now became a home. Elijah built the shelves he'd promised, then a chicken coop, then a cradle, though Mercy never asked for one. She planted herbs, then flowers, then peach seeds from the preserves Elijah brought home every month. One night, as winter loosened its grip and the fire crackled low, Mercy found a paper-wrapped bundle near her chair. Inside, a white shawl, hand-woven with a blue trim. She touched it carefully. "Did you make this?" Elijah didn't look up from his chair. "I asked an old woman in town. Gave her the thread myself." "Why?" "Because spring's coming," he said, simply. "And you always shiver when it rains." Mercy wrapped it around her shoulders and whispered, "Thank you." He nodded. "You're welcome, Mrs. Creed." She turned, startled. It was the first time he'd spoken it aloud, not to claim her, but to honor her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She stood behind him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said only, "And you gave me a name, but more than that, you gave it meaning." Weeks later, the church bell rang. The town gathered for a spring service, the first in months. Mercy stood in the back, quiet and composed. When the preacher finished, Elijah walked beside her, not into a pew, but toward the front. Gasps rippled through the room like wind through wheat. He turned to face the town, voice clear but low. "I never cared for ceremony," he said. "But this woman stood with me when I had nothing but blood and regret." He reached for her hand. "She's my wife," with or without a preacher's words. Silence fell. Then, from the back, a voice, old and tired, called out, "Amen." It was the blacksmith. Then another joined, and another. Even the preacher, stunned, gave a small nod. Mercy didn't speak. She didn't have to. Elijah squeezed her hand gently, and they walked back down the aisle together. No fanfare, no flowers, no music, just dignity and peace. That night, as stars poured across the sky like spilled salt, Mercy carved one more word into the cabin wall beneath her name, home. And for the first time since she'd fallen on that dirt road with no memory, no name, and no place to go, she knew exactly who she was.
If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that even the most forgotten souls can find love, dignity, and a place to belong, take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. And if you believe the world still needs stories like this, quiet, powerful, and full of hope, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next one.